Hi, I'm Craig Callio, and welcome to the second installment of my teaching series. And today we're going to talk about interruptions. You know, when I was a young lad watching television, uh, once in a while, the show I was watching would be interrupted. Something of an emergency nature would come up on the screen. And then a voice would say, "We interrupt this program to bring you this important announcement." So my heart is just beating fast. What's going on? What's going on? And, how dare they interrupt my favorite program? And so we have this announcement. And I got to thinking, that's a good example of kind of what was going on with Jesus and his ministry. It was one interruption after another. And so today I'm dipping into the 11th, or excuse me, the ninth chapter of Matthew's Gospel. And let me just read a few things that give you a flavor for these interruptions that Jesus has. He's been to the other side on the Sea of Galilee. That would be the Gadarenes side, the pagan side. And so he's done some healing over there, and he gets in the boat, and he crossed over and came to his own city, which was Capernaum. And behold, they brought to him a paralytic. So here's Jesus. He just gets off the boat, and here comes an interruption. This paralytic is brought before him. And then, according to the chapter, we have the calling of Matthew, the tax collector, says, "Follow me." And he has a meal with him, and he's criticized by the people around seeing this, saying, "Well, you eat with sinners, this tax collector here. What gives?" And so while this is going on, then the disciples of John came to him, and they had this question that they wanted Jesus to deal with and answer. And while he was speaking to them, behold, a ruler came in and knelt before him, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand upon her." And so he takes care of this issue. And then, as Jesus passed on from there, two blind men followed him, crying aloud, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." And so he deals with that interruption. And then, as these people that he just healed are moving away, as they were going away, behold, a dumb demoniac was brought to him. You see, and this is just the ninth chapter of Matthew's Gospel. So it's one generation, one interruption rather after another. You know what? Jesus seemed to thrive on interruptions. So to me, there's something anxiety provoking about interruptions, just like when I was young and the television show was interrupted by this important announcement. It's an interruption, and it's anxiety provoking. What's going on? What's going on? Am I going to be okay? Is my family going to be okay? And we never really know what an interruption's going to mean. But Jesus seemed to roll with all of them, and they're all different, all different kinds of needs, and Jesus takes his time and deals with them, one after another. And so in hearing what I just read and all of these interruptions, we're inclined to think, in probing the Gospel of Matthew, my mind says, my gosh, that's just the way it is, I guess. Interruption. It's the way that has always been. Life just gets interrupted, and that's the way it was for Jesus. I remember Father Theodore Hesburgh, who was for many years the president of the University of Notre Dame. He started in the 50s and retired in the late 1980s. But he always left his office door open. And I'm going to paraphrase, but his favorite motto really was interruptions do not take away from my life. Interruptions are my life. And so having an open door made himself vulnerable to interruptions. But that's why he was there. This is a Catholic institution. Father Hesburgh is a priest of the Holy Cross, or the Congregation of Holy Cross. And so it's a religiously focused university, and he wants to be available to them, just like Jesus was, interrupted. And, being the president of this prestigious university, he's a busy man. And yet he allowed himself to be vulnerable to interruptions because to him that was his life. And that's why he was there. And of course, as a result, he had, when he retired, a wonderful, wonderful reputation. And still to this day, the library there is named after him. That's that tall building you see in the background with the touchdown Jesus on it. That's the Hesburgh Library. So someone once said that speaking of our plans and our agenda and interruptions, life is what happens when we're making other plans. Sound familiar? Life is what happens when we're making other plans. And we could equally say God is happening when we are making other plans. And so the very heart of Jesus' ministry, his life, was making himself vulnerable to people and consequently to interruptions. And that's really the heart of being a follower of Jesus, is really about our willingness to be interrupted by things, needs outside the family, things that come up, and being available and offering our help and as a follower of Christ. Certainly I don't want to diss making plans and having goals and so forth. That's important. But, we have to plan for things. That's just the way life is. Life really each day goes much better when we have a plan, what we want to accomplish. And schedules tend to identify who we are. They really do. Someone once said there are three things that define us as individuals, define who we are, what we value, what we care about. So the first is our checkbook. The second is our credit cards. And third is our calendar. Checkbook, credit cards, calendars. That's what goes into the making of who we are, what we value, what we do, and what our priorities are. So the issue then for us as Christians becomes when our plans, the plans that you and I make, become more important to us than God's plan for us. Uh, God is trying persistently to break into our lives, and do we let our plans, our schedule get in the way and block that? Um, so the key really is to be open to God and interruptions into our life in spite of all that we schedule. And to not do so, in other words, to just stay focused on our agenda and forget the other needs, ignore the other needs, ignore God's call on our lives, is a form of idolatry. So let me give you an example. I was trying to think of sort of modern day examples of interruptions in daily life. And the first thing that came to mind was firefighters. Look at the life of a firefighter. They're on duty, they're at the station, and they may be eating, they may be sleeping, they may be taking a class, going through an exercise, and they get a call for an emergency, a fire or an accident, and they drop what they're doing and they take care of it. See, they're there to be interrupted. And I don't know what the fire exam is if you want to apply to be a firefighter. But to me, the first question ought to be, how do you feel about interruptions? Do you mind if you get aroused from your sleep at 2:30 in the morning? Do you mind getting interrupted when you're about ready to dig into a just delicious steak? Who knows? But our willingness to be interrupted. You see, the issue here is the firefighters, of course, see the big picture. It's not about being there so they can eat the steak and being there so they can sleep. It's about being there and being vulnerable to that alarm going off, dispatching them to where they are needed. And that's their faithfulness. And that's what they give their lives for. They risk their lives to be available in the midst of these interruptions. And so we have to be careful. Do our plans become more important than God's plans for us? The ninth chapter of Matthew begins with Jesus' call on Matthew. Remember, Matthew was the tax collector. In other words, he worked for the enemy. He worked for the government, collecting taxes. And of course, it was the tax for the toll road, probably, because one of the major roads passed through that area. On its way to either the Mediterranean or on its way to Rome, the Via Roma road to Rome. Of course, there's a tax for that. But you see, Matthew, like other Roman tax collectors, not only collected the assigned fee, but a little more for themselves. So you can imagine what other people, the general population, thought about them. They were despised. And so now Jesus calls this person who is despised terribly by the population to be one of Jesus' disciples. I remember the image of, we read about James and John and Andrew fishing, and Jesus comes along and says, drop your nets. I'm going to have you fishing for men or for people. And so what do? According to the scriptures, they drop their nets and follow Jesus. And that's kind of the model that is out there for us when we respond to God's call upon our lives. You know, we may not rush to get to it, but eventually we do. I mean, I put off call to ministry, tried to avoid it, tried to deny it. Even as a young 12-year-old, I think thinking, I think it just feels right attending church every Sunday and really enjoying church. And it wasn't until I was ensconced in a wonderful career, upward mobility, that I left all of that, moved my family to the other part of the country to go to school, to study to be a clergy person for 3 years. So follow me. Could take a number of years, but the point is, eventually, as much as I loved my plans, as much joy and money they brought to me, ultimately I surrendered that for the call of God on my life. And you know what? I've never regretted it at all, despite how hard it was, the many sacrifices made to accomplish what I needed to accomplish. And so it's been a wonderful 33 years of ministry, and I've really enjoyed it, and I don't regret any part of it at all. And so, so the lesson today is really about to not only believe in a living God, but a God whose grace and power are so great that they actually interrupt death. We see that not only in Matthew's gospel, but all throughout the gospels, how Jesus interrupts death and brings new life to people like you and me. And so we can define death as kind of like the 23rd Psalm, walking in a dark, deep valley that feels like death. When life turns on us, becomes very sour. God brings new life to us. And so we pray to God, ultimately, that God can perhaps use our plans. I mean, I don't want to suggest that the plans we make are useless to God. They certainly aren't. They may not be a priority for God, but anyway, the prayer that we should have is really about, are the plans I have useful to God? Is our schedule useful to God? But also, can God use us in spite of our plans and our goals? I remember another quote. It said, if you want to make God laugh, tell God your plans. That's so true in my life, and maybe it's true in your life. And so, how many times has God said, follow me? Follow me. It's an invitation that goes far beyond our plans, far beyond our schedules. It's the life that we call the life of abundancy. So thank you for being with me this morning and for today's lesson. Next week, I want to talk about the difference between healing and curing. In the meantime, I hope you have a grand week. Be safe and be healthy, and God bless each of you.